This is Orange Nation Overtime with Steve Infanti and Paulie Sibilia.
Welcome into Orange Nation Overtime, everyone, alongside Paulie Sibilia. I'm Steve Infanti. The big news, of course, coming down last night, Jeff Goodman reporting that Brian Hodgson has turned down the Syracuse job. Mike Waters from Syracuse.com, for what it's worth, he was able to confirm through his sources that Hodgson is, quote, out of the running. Interesting, Adam Zagoria also, confirming Jeff Goodman's tweet, that the wording of which all seems to suggest that potentially Hodgson didn't actually have an offer on the table, and maybe Syracuse decided to steer in another direction. But whatever the reason, however this played out, Hodgson's side is putting out there that he is the one to turn down the job, Paulie, and that Syracuse is now looking elsewhere for their next head coach.
Yeah, it is it's basically we don't know anything. It's just he could have been offered, he couldn't have been offered. Everybody's reporting something.
I do
different.
think the wording is very interesting. Nobody said that he turned down an offer. It was, what did Goodman put? Turned down the Syracuse job. Mike Waters said out of the running.
But if you turn something down, you've been offered it.
Yeah, but it could be I turned down the opportunity to coach there.
I pulled my name out of that. I think it would have been he pulled his name out of the running.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that the fact that nobody used the word offer leads me to believe that potentially there wasn't necessarily an offer on the table. Now, we had Mike McAllister on today, and Mike released a post this morning, CuseNation.com, and he laid out, again, speculation, Paulie, the three potential scenarios that he thought are most likely. Number one, Syracuse liked somebody else better, and they parted ways, and they said, we're good, and Hodgson's people wanted to put it out there that, well, it was our decision, we're walking away. Number two, SU bowed out at some point if it was a bidding war. It got too rich for their blood, or they didn't like the fact that, Providence was being used as leverage or South Florida was being used as leverage, and they said, we're not playing this game. They got turned off by it, and they walked away. Or it could be, truly the NIL package, the financial package, salary, resources, NIL, all of that was just not to Brian Hodgson's liking, and they, packed up and walked away and said, we'll decide between Providence and South Florida. There are other possible scenarios, I guess, but I think Mike's right. I think those three are probably the most plausible.
Yeah, and now we sit and wait, Steve.
We do.
Who's next?
We do.
I'm going the field still.
Yeah.
I'm probably wrong, but I'm going to stick with my initial. You know how you do that?
Stick with your gut?
Yeah. Well, you stick with your initial pick, even though it's getting wrong. Like, hey, I'm going to pick the Steelers to win the Super Bowl, and as the season goes on, they still make the playoffs, but you're like, yeah, I got to stick with them. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick with the field.
With it. Yeah, I tend to think it's going to be Jerry, but we'll find out. I would assume we're going to find out sooner rather than later, right? The next few days, potentially over the course of the next week, whatever timeline you want to put on it. Syracuse is going to want to move quickly here. I think we're going to know who the next head coach is pretty soon. I mentioned we had Mike McAllister, on our Orange Nation radio show this afternoon, and we delved into that post, and we let him off by asking him, I said, Mike, listen, what do you think happened in this Brian Hodgson situation?
I know that when that report came out from Jeff Goodman, kind of the prevailing thought from a lot of Syracuse fans was that it was Syracuse got outbid, that Hodgson turned down an offer, and I don't have any sourcing or information that he was provided a formal offer, first of all. But secondly, I think that there needs to be at least an open door to the possibility that it wasn't Hodgson saying no to Syracuse, but it could have been Syracuse saying no to Hodgson. Now, that can be for a variety of reasons. That could be because you go through an interview process, you talk to him or people in his camp or his agent or whatever, and there's some sort of personalities that don't align, there's some sort of vision that doesn't align, or the financial part of it could be, a part of it as well, whether it's the expectation for NIL or whatever the case is. All of those are possibilities. But there's also the possibility that Syracuse goes through this process. They're evaluating Hodgson. They're evaluating several other candidates, and they came to the conclusion that there was another candidate that they liked better, that they were going to move forward with, that they talked to that person, feel good that that person's going to accept whatever offer that they provide, and that they informed Hodgson's camp or agent or whoever it is that they were going in another direction. And then Hodgson's agent, of course, contacts members of the media to put out there that they rejected Syracuse in order to kind of get out in front of the eventual Syracuse announcing someone else as the head coach. So I think all of those should be kept as potential things that went on here until we have someone that is willing to speak on the record that we feel is giving the entire picture of what happened. And I'm not sure that ever will, simply because if you're Syracuse and whoever you end up hiring as your head coach, you're going to tell people was your number one choice, right? You're going to tell people that regardless of whether it is or not. And from Hodgson's side of things, they're going to tell people, no, this wasn't a job that I wanted and I was turned down for. I turned them down. That's just kind of how it works. So there's probably always going to be some spin going on here from both sides, and that's just kind of the reality that we're living in.
Right, and I was just going to say that you can't say we didn't want this guy, then hire another coach who's, I'm your second choice.
Yeah, I mean that's not going to happen. Even when we know that a coach is third, fourth, fifth choice, whoever it is, right? The school or organization, if it's a professional team, they never say that. They always tell you, hey, look, we had an exhausted process, and it became clear to us that this was the best fit at this time. They'll say something along those lines, and that's just kind of the reality that we're in.
All right, so how about from the Brian Hodgson side of this, Mike? The timing seemed kind of odd. Is it, in your opinion, just to get out in front of it? Because their camp, his camp was aware that they're going to go in a different direction. So make sure that you say that you bowed out as opposed to the other way around before Syracuse hires somebody.
I mean, I think logically that's certainly a possibility. I don't know 100% for sure, and I don't want to, say something that makes it sound like I know for sure that that's what Hodgson is doing, because I don't. I'm sort of reading tea leaves and speculating a little bit here. But the timing, to your point, seems odd just because I think most of us expected that we'd know at some point this week, depending on how some seasons ended or didn't, that we'd know who the next head coach was going to be by the end of this week or perhaps after the weekend. And the fact that we're here now and right before the NCAA tournament games start being played by, some of those candidates, then all of a sudden this report comes out. The timing of it seems a little bit odd, especially since there were the comments about South Florida trying to give him some sort of lucrative extension, and then Providence still after him. So it still seems there's some posturing for leverage there to try to continue driving up the price for how much he's going to cost for wherever he ends up next year. And so it would seem odd that if you're trying to do some of that leveraging, you would be taking a Syracuse off the table because they would help your ability to continue leveraging things for a higher price. So from one realm of this or one branch of this is that the logic is there's some logic to the fact that he could have been told Syracuse is moving in another direction, tried to get out in front of it.
Yeah, you talk about the leverage, though. Is there a chance that Syracuse was priced out? They had a set price, and he passed it.
That's certainly a possibility. So back to the leveraging point, whenever you have a bidding war between people or schools or professional organizations, whatever it is, everyone's got a line where they're like, we're not going above this. And if you're Syracuse, whether you viewed Hodgson as your top choice or you viewed someone else as a top choice or a couple of 2 or 3 candidates relatively close to each other, if you've got Hodgson and the price keeps going up and up and up, at some point you're going to say, we're not willing to spend that, not necessarily because we can't, although that is a possibility, but maybe we're just not willing to because we think that getting, one of the other candidates that we talked to and we're interested in at maybe a couple million less per year is we feel like we're still getting a really good coach. We still think that the NIL is going to be there for that coach. And to us, it just is getting too pricey for, what we're willing to do. Every school has a budget. Every school has a line of how much they're willing to pay. And, it's one of the possibilities of this thing that the bidding war was taking place. Syracuse hit their line and just said, sorry, but we're not doing that.
For the sake of argument here, let's say that Brian Hodgson stays put at South Florida. If that happens, What does that say to you, Mike, about college basketball in 2026? That two of the hottest names in the offseason, Josh Schertz and, under this scenario, Brian Hodgson, would stay put at St. Louis and South Florida. Does it signal that, there are only truly like a handful of really big jobs in the country? Or do you think that would just be a coincidence if it happens like that?
It probably is a coincidence because you'd need to see it happen, I think, multiple times in order to start trying to find a trend there. But I do think in modern college athletics, you're in a world where Indiana can win the national championship in football. So you're also in a world where a school like a St. Louis or a Providence or a South Florida or whoever it is can spend a lot of money at a sport that they decide that they want to, especially if you have the backing from donors. And think about a school like Providence, for example, that's another school that's been in the rumor mill for Hodgson. They don't have to worry about football. So if they don't have to allocate money for football and they've got rich donors that want to see the basketball team be successful, they can spend more on a head coach or on NIL or whatever in order to try to make sure that happens. So the fact that you've got this money that's coming from donors and paying for players and helping shape your roster, that makes it so that a school that's maybe at a non-major program can retain players, can retain coaches, and make their program more than just a stepping stone for the Power Four conference programs.
I'm sure that you were on social media last night. I'm sure you saw the same stuff that we saw that, if it's not going to be Brian Hodgson, shut down the program. What would you say to the SU fan that is fearful that, Syracuse isn't a quote-unquote serious program anymore, or that, the athletics department doesn't care about them? I mean, what would be your response to that?
Well, the first thing I want to do is I understand the emotional reaction. The emotional reaction is there because Syracuse basketball fans are extremely passionate. They grew up watching this team be one of the best programs in the country for 5+ decades, right? So there's a level of expectation because of the success that they've had, and then there's a level of passion that they've had for so many decades, and it's hard to get out of that. So I understand where the reaction comes from. I think at the end of the day, even those that are upset and mad and furious and saying they're going to cancel season tickets and they're never supporting this program again and all of those types of things, ultimately, at the end of the day, they all want the same thing that those saying, I would be really happy if Jerry McNamara became the coach. They all want the team to be successful. And even if you think it's less likely that Syracuse is successful if they hire someone other than Brian Hodgson, there is still the possibility that if they hire Jerry McNamara, Mike Hopkins, Phil Martelli Jr., some of these others, Luke Murray, that have been, potentially discussed as candidates, if they hire one of those guys, there is the possibility that the donors are excited about whoever that is, that they give that person more in NIL than what they've had the last few years, and that Syracuse is able to get themselves back on track in terms of making the NCAA tournament again and then kind of going from there. So what I would say to those fans that are upset is, let's see how it plays out. Let's see who it is that is hired, and then pay attention to the offseason, because you'll know based on who they get in the transfer portal, whether they have stepped up their game from an NIL standpoint or not. That's what I think. And so if they're able to get some big splashes in the transfer portal, then you see how the first season goes. And if things start to go in a positive direction, I think everyone that's upset right now will come back and will be back to just, talking smack to UConn fans and Georgetown fans and worrying about where they're going to be in the tournament.
We asked Mike Pauly about, what his message would be to fans right now, fearful that, Syracuse isn't a serious program because they couldn't land the guy that they wanted, or, athletics, the athletic department doesn't care about the fan base. What would you say to, because you've seen it, right? And a lot of those comments have been directed at us on social media. How would you respond to that today?
If you're a fan, you have to embrace whoever the next coach is, whether you wanted him or not. And you just got to hope things get better. Wait for the results before you get mad. If he starts losing, then go ahead, get after him.
Yeah, and I do think you have to wait for the results in this case. I mean, if we learn anything from the AD search, it's that things aren't always the way that they appear. And it seemed like, well, it's got to be Nick Carparelli. It's got to be Nick Carparelli. And then it wasn't. And, well, now it's going to be Heather Lyke. And it wasn't. Yeah. And it was Brian Blair. And they went outside the family, and they landed somebody who wasn't really talked about, obviously, when the whole search started. So we have to see how this whole thing plays out. I do think that is good advice. We got the local perspective from Mike McAllister. We also got the national perspective on this story from Damon Amendolara, SiriusXM Mad Dog Sports Talk Radio host. And we led him off by asking for his reaction when he heard the news last night that Brian Hodgson was out and no longer in the running for the Syracuse job.
I thought all along that Syracuse was going to land Brian, and I really thought, and maybe this is a little delusional, that he was using Providence to the very end to up the NIL financial commitment by Syracuse. But I just thought, and I still think, that Syracuse is a great job, and I think it can be a great job, and that I think there is a sleeping, potential there, sleeping beast potential, and that a guy coming back to upstate New York with the dome and with the name and with the practice facility and with all of that knew how the landscape was going to look in modern college basketball, even at SU, and was ultimately going to pick it. And it was just kind of the crossing of T's, dotting of I's. The fact that he backed out was pretty stunning to me, because it means either Providence has deeper pockets or USF is a better job, or neither one is the best job he thinks he can get, and he'll go back into the cycle next year. None of that is good news for Syracuse. And so, yeah, I'll admit it, I was stunned last night.
Do you feel as though he was the best candidate for the job? Do you feel like there is a drop-off now with Brian Hodgson and whoever they pick, or do you think they're going to find a fine replacement for Adrian Autry, and you pair him with the right resources and off you go?
Well, I think, honestly, when it comes to Jerry McNamara, under most circumstances, most years, GMAC would be a pretty darn good option. I mean, this is a guy that we all know, knows the program, knows the landscape, has been an assistant coach. And if anybody could activate the resources at SU, the fans at SU, it would be GMAC. So some of the Brian Hodgson stuff felt to me to be of the moment, that he was the apple of people's eyes because right now he seemed dramatic, and the Adrian Autry thing was so problematic that there was a lack of appetite for a former Syracuse assistant, that maybe in the moment Hodgson seemed great, but really under most circumstances, GMAC would be the obvious answer here. So I think once we pick up the pieces and I think, kind of get our stabilization back a little bit, maybe GMAC just ends up being, the easy answer here. And the way the Autry situation unfolded, went down, ended, I think, has a lot of people very worried about what a former assistant coach might look like at SU and whether we're all kind of blinded by loyalty to the program. But I do think beyond Hodgson and GMAC, there feels like there's not a natural fit and that you're throwing a dart. And Hodgson is a dart and GMAC's a dart in some ways, but at least both those guys had reasonable things to get really excited about. Hodgson has his ties to upstate New York, has turned around two smaller programs, feels very of the moment in modern college basketball, manipulating rosters, transfer portal for a good reason, doing it well. And those are things that Syracuse obviously needs, and GMAC for obvious reasons. So after those candidates, nothing feels exciting. But then again, I mean, let's face it, these types of openings happen a lot. And most often you have to take a huge leap of faith. And it just so happened that this year, because of the roots of Hodgson and the history of GMAC, neither one felt like such a dramatic risk that it normally would.
Where do you stand on the Boeheim fatigue in all of this? Do you understand that from the fan base?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Look, I think that especially when you're going through it, Jim Boeheim is never going to be warm and cuddly. And for those 40 some odd years, by the very end, yeah, anybody would get, I think, tired of something that lasted 4+ decades. And Jim has always had a very opinionated, at sometimes abrasive type of personality. So it's not a warm and fuzzy type of experience. At the same time, I don't know if it's fair to Jerry McNamara to hold what some people might resent against Jim Boeheim against GMAC. He's his own guy, and he's proving it at Siena. And the Adrian Autry thing, again, I don't think should be held against Jerry McNamara either. Autry just might not be as good of a head coach, or the situation at Syracuse might just be better for the next head coach because the last 3 years taught the administration something. And I really like the new AD. I really like him. I think Brian Blair is going to be very, very good in this role. So, but yes, of course I understand. I think anybody that doesn't understand that type of sentiment probably hasn't lived or breathed the Syracuse program and understood kind of like what the inside of the guts feels like. And the thing with Boeheim will always be complicated, I think, for everybody.
We had Mike Tirico on the show earlier in the week, and he, of course, was on the search committee to find the new athletic director and to find the new chancellor, for that matter. And we asked him if he thought Syracuse could get back to a day where it's nationally relevant in basketball and football at the same time, back when, I was a kid here, you were a student here, Paulie was working here, back to those days of being nationally relevant in both sports. He said without a doubt yes, but that, it would take X, Y, and Z to get there. Damon, do you see a day when, the dome is full again for both sports and both are in the top 20 and both are, competing for conference championships? And do you think that Syracuse can get to a point where the resources, the NIL packages, all of that is where it needs to be for that to happen?
So this is the single most interesting question about it all. Because I went through SU late 90s. I graduated in 2001. Mike was there in the late 80s. And by the time I got there, we heard about the glory years of 1987. By the time I got there, my senior year, Syracuse football missed the bowl game at 6-6. They were not taking 500 teams back then. My first 2 years on campus was Donovan McNabb. My last 2 years on campus was Troy Nunes. So I already was kind of 1 foot in the glory years, 1 foot out of the glory years. Now that's 25 years ago, and the landscape has changed dramatically. For Syracuse, it's a problematic position in the ACC because Duke and North Carolina, I just don't think anybody in America can really catch if you're in that conference. That's just not a reasonable bar to cross. Whereas in the Big East, Syracuse was UNC and Duke. So that you have to realize is a number one threshold that's probably unreasonable. The dominance that Syracuse had between like 1984 and like 1992 in basketball or beyond is just not reasonable in a conference that has Duke and North Carolina. Okay. Number two in football. Again, are you talking about a conference that you can reasonably compete at the very top for year after year after year? I've said this to my brethren, my colleagues, the guys that I graduated with. I think most of us feel like, hey, if you could tell us we're in the ACC championship game once every 4 or 5 years, we would take that. We're not trying to be Clemson. We're not trying to be Florida State, even though Florida State has not been that. We're not trying to be Miami. It's just you've got to be in the top 4 or 5 every single year. Is that good enough for everybody? If that's what constitutes the glory days, then yeah, I think that's in play. If we're talking about being the dominant force in a conference ever again, it's probably not. And this is the harsh reality, which I wrote about on my Substack today and did a video about on YouTube. And my YouTube channel the last couple of weeks, I've done a lot of Syracuse kind of digging into what all this change means. It's a transformational moment for college sports and this university. I was just up there for the UNC game in February, spoke to some students, and, I had a great weekend, but it is so obvious. We all stand in this weird spot in college sports where it's really not about culture, history, legacy, what happened before you, which is what Syracuse has relied on and everybody else relied on for decades. It's really just about your payroll. And it's such a hard thing to reconcile because in 2026, we're not that far away from all the old stuff mattering. And that's where I think Adrian Autry was caught. Some of it his own doing, some of it maybe not his fault. And that is the landscape changed within like the last 4 years. I mean, that dramatically. And so if you're asking me, and I think, look, Mike is the best of the best. He absolutely is the right guy to help man this ship. And I've got nothing but admiration for him, obviously. And I consider him a friend as well. If Mike believes that the money is there to have one of the highest payrolls in the ACC, he would know far better than I do. I just wonder if that's realistic. I don't know. And unfortunately, that's today's college sports landscape. And until that changes, I don't know what a reasonable expectation is for annual performance for Syracuse. Is it to be a top 4 team of the ACC? And I don't want to hear that going to the ACC was a mistake because we all didn't like it, but it's the unfortunate reality. If you're not in the ACC, then Syracuse doesn't have a home for football. And if you don't have a home for football, what exactly where do you think the NIL money comes from if it's not going to come from the same donors that you're asking for right now? Like, you have to be in the ACC. So, long-winded answer, because I think this is a really complicated question. I think Syracuse could be far better in its standing than it is right now. And I really like the new AD, and I think the new chancellor has the right priorities, and hopefully the new coach is in the right realm there. But it really, some of this is kind of beyond the pale, because maybe college sports needs guardrails so that this isn't the only thing that everybody needs, which is basically how much is your payroll this year.
You know, you mentioned the payroll, and like, is this sustainable even for a Duke or a North Carolina and Kentucky? Is this sustainable for $22 million payrolls? You keep going back to the same people with no return on investment?
I don't think so. Granted, I didn't grow up in SEC football country, so I don't know. I mean, some of this has always been the reality of SEC football. It's like you go to the same oil guys, you go to the same banking guys, you go to the same, business owners, the car wash guys, and you say, well, we need an extra $100,000 here, an extra $200,000 here, an extra $1 million here, and this has always been the arms race that they've dealt with. Now it's hit everybody, and certainly at Syracuse, I just think that that's kind of untenable. I think at most schools that's untenable, and I think there's an appetite for it maybe right now, but there won't be for, in the next 5, 7, 10 years, just as you kind of allude to. Like, why would people just keep forking over, $700,000 every offseason to pay for players? I just don't understand, but that's kind of what you're looking for, unless you can maximize other revenue models, and hopefully that's what Brian Blair can do. But no, I just don't think for most schools you can keep asking the same 20 donors for lots of money, because again, it's not like alumni like myself who, if you come to me and you say like, okay, we need, $5,000. I'm like, oh, okay, I got a family. But maybe I can figure that out. Like, you don't need $5,000. You need $500,000. How many people can dip in their pockets year after year and give that? I don't know. I don't live in that universe. So that's when I do think it's untenable.
Really good conversation there from Damon. And, Paulie, we say that Syracuse wants to move quickly. Time is of the essence. Do you think we're going to know who the next head coach is before Monday?
Yeah, I think they probably know right now.
Yeah.
But we'll,
I tend to think so as well.
We'll find out. We'll all find out together. But I think Monday when we're doing our show here, we'll be talking about the next head coach.
We should also mention you unveiled the bracket today.
And killed on the socials.
Because of the bracket?
Yeah. Best TV theme song bracket came out, 64 best.
Yeah.
The biggest omission, the one that, what do you think's got people the angriest? And this is probably an overlook on the committee's part. And I'm the committee. Friends.
I was going to ask you about Friends. You didn't put Friends in?
Friends didn't make it.
Wow.
No.
I didn't know Friends wasn't in. I assumed it was.
They didn't make the cut.
Wow.
They struggled. They're like Kentucky.
Did they use like an ineligible player and they were like disqualified? Because Friends should be in the field.
Yeah, they're not in. They're not in. This is a clear oversight by the committee.
How can people find the bracket? How can people vote on the bracket?
Go to Twitter, QSportsTalk.com. There'll be 4 different games a day. They'll pop up, Q Sports Talk on Twitter. And you can vote there.
All right. So we're not going to drag this out as we have in years past.
No, it's going to be 116 games tomorrow. So you'll have the Jeffersons versus Law and Order, Mr. Rogers versus Dragnet, Twilight Zone versus Have Gun Will Travel, and the Brady Bunch versus I Dream of Jeannie.
Okay, there you go. So vote. The winners will advance.
Friends was like Auburn.
Just on the outside looking at it. You said Curb Your Enthusiasm was Auburn.
Yep.
Them too.
Yes, they're both like Auburn.
All right. We got to go, everybody. For Paulie, I'm Steve. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.